Imagine if you could just write out stories and tasks and an AI agent could do all the coding for you on your next business or software. That's exactly what we're going to break down in today's episode. So let's get straight into it. We have Nan Yu, the head of product at Linear today. What are we going to do?
I'm going to give you a quick demo of how AI agents work on Linear.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so to start with, I'm just going to, use one of my own projects, my personal website. So, I have it running here. I have a server running. It's like a static site generator. And when it renders, it looks something like this, right? This is the exact same copy of my website that you'll find on the internet. And I have a Linear instance hooked up to the GitHub repo that powers the website. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add one of the many available AI agents, a coding agent, right, to this Linear instance. So I'll go to settings, I'll go down to integrations, and we have this agents section, and there's a lot of different agents here that do different things. Famously, like ChatPRD helps you write documentation, and things like Devin people have heard of. But I'm going to use this one called CodeGen, which is one of our development partners, and then they provide a very excellent coding agent. So I'll click on CodeGen, and then I'm just going to do a very quick install process. I'll enable, and this is on CodeGen's website. I'll skip the Slack installation. I'll confirm the Linear installation, and then I'll just skip inviting friends, and then we should be good to go. And now, if I go back to my Linear configuration, and I go to this team, let's go to team settings. I can see that if I go to the members list, that CodeGen is available as a team member, right? And you can add CodeGen to, obviously this is my own personal workspace, but in your team's workspace, you can add it to any one of your Linear teams that you want it to be interactive with. Okay, so now that's the initial setup. It's actually very quick. The whole thing should be done in less than 5 minutes. So I can go to the issues on this team and sort of look at all the issues that I have. I made this one right here. So just a very quick explainer. My personal website, you can see it's in dark mode right now, and it's because it's taking my system preferences. Some people, they want to read their website in dark mode always or light mode always, and I want to give my readers a little bit of a freedom to make that choice. So the easiest thing to do here is I could just write a quick issue. It says, hey, add a control to the homepage to manually toggle light and dark mode, and give it some background. Right now it's controlled by a media query. It works fine as default, but let's give our users a little bit of control here. Right, so very simple explanation. I'm going to ask CodeGen, that has stuff typed here. CodeGen, give me a plan to implement this, right? So I'm just mentioning, right, the agent exactly in the same way that you would mention a person. Often you don't have to, right? Sometimes you can just go straight to implementation. I think for more complicated types of things, you want to just make sure it's going to take the right approach before it kind of goes into like all the deep exploration that it takes to actually produce the full-blown code output. For something like this, I normally wouldn't. It's kind of a small change, but I just want to demonstrate like a very normal kind of process, right? For a much larger change, you typically want to have a plan so you can sanity check what the approach is.
Got it.
Yeah. So you can see that CodeGen immediately responded, and with a link to its own website. So I can click this and kind of see what's going on inside of here, and you can see it working, right? And it's going to take a little while because it has to run its own local environment and run things. So at some point, the execution is going to happen. It's going to start reading files and figuring out what to do and start formulating a plan. This is, depending on how big your repository is, it's going to, kind of take shorter or longer and all sorts of things like that.
Can you go in and go look at those files?
Yeah, you can kind of see like what it's looking at. Again, this is just in the initial sort of pass through where it's kind of making a plan. And this is like the gnarly details, right? In a normal situation, I would do this and I would just go get a coffee, move on to a different, like piece of work that I have to do, answer emails, whatever it is, right? You don't have to babysit this because this is just like the sort of interior thought process that it's taking to do this stuff.
AI evals are one of the most important skills for PMs, and I know they matter. The question is, are you doing them right? Most teams are winging it with basic metrics and hoping for the best. Meanwhile, the teams that actually ship reliable AI, they've cracked the code on systematic evaluation. Today's episode is brought to you by the AI Evals for Engineers and PMs course by Hamal Hussein and Shreya Shankar. This live Maven course will teach you the battle-tested frameworks from Hamal and Shreya, who are the engineers behind GitHub Copilot's evaluation system and 25 plus production AI implementations. 4 weeks, live instruction. Next cohort starts July 21st. Start shipping AI that actually works. Enroll at maven.com with my code AG-product-growth for over $800 off. That's AG-PRODUCT-GROWTH. Today's episode is brought to you by Vanta. As a founder, you're moving fast toward product market fit, your next round, or your first big enterprise deal. But with AI accelerating how quickly startups build and ship, security expectations are higher earlier than ever. Getting security and compliance right can unlock growth, or stall it if you wait too long. With deep integrations and automated workflows built for fast-moving teams, Vanta gets you audit-ready fast and keeps you secure with continuous monitoring as your models, infra, and customers evolve. Fast-growing startups like LangChain, Writer, and Cursor trusted Vanta to build a scalable foundation from the start. So go to vanta.com/Aakash, that's vanta.com/AAKASH, to save $1,000 and join over 10,000 ambitious companies already scaling with Vanta.
Can you set it off on multiple tasks at once?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that is really useful for something like this is that I can go to the next task, kind of examine it, fix up the issue, kick off another process. And again, we're just, formulating a plan here. I could have directly asked it to make the implementation as well. And we'll take a look at that in a second. But something that we see a lot of customers doing, right, is they'll have like a backlog of sort of low priority bugs, right, that they know kind of causes either users some grief. Maybe it even happens pretty frequently, but it's just like it's never going to be severe enough for an engineer to kind of like take time out of their day and like put everything else down and kind of deal with it. You can literally just go into your backlog, Command A, select everything, and just assign it to CodeGen, and it'll do all of it for you. So that's, it kind of turns that, kind of procrastination problem into something like, okay, now you just have a bunch of code reviews. Go ahead and merge all these things, right? Okay, cool. So it seems like it formulated a plan. I was babysitting it here, but if I go back to the linear tab, I can see that my inbox had a message in here, right? That was this. So that output was also here. So it kind of, said, hey, here's my 5-step implementation plan. Here's what I'm going to do, right? And then it kind of it gives a sort of a deep link back to sort of its internal audit trail, right, for me to kind of examine it, right? So I could have been, like looping on something else, and then whenever it was ready, right, it sent in a message into my inbox instead of linear. That's hooked up to my push notifications and all that good stuff. So, I don't have to kind of wonder and babysit there. I can just like kind of come back to it and it'll be ready to go, right? So I'm going to read through this. This seems like a fairly straightforward change. So I'm just going to go ahead and tell CodeGen to do it, right? Sounds good. Let's do it. All right. I think that's a clear enough signal for CodeGen to take it. So CodeGen saw that I wrote that and says, great, I'll start implementing this. And a couple of things will happen. One of the first things that'll happen is, I can sort of watch CodeGen do this stuff, but once it gets going, so let's take a look at how things are progressing. We can wait for it to sort of start up again. And then the first thing it's going to do is it's going to self-assign the linear issue, right? It's going to be like, look, I'm taking this. Other engineers, you don't have to do it. So if I go back to linear, you can see that it's self-assigned to the issue because it's just another user, like every other user in the system. And it marked the issue as in progress, right? So it's just like to let everybody know, to show up on all the reporting that this thing's in progress and I'm taking care of it. And now it's going to, kind of churn through its plan and write the code, make the changes, do some testing, and all the stuff that you would assume like a normal, competent engineer is going to be doing in the background. So it found some CSS that it needs to update. It found where like light mode and dark mode are set. And now, it's going to try to edit these things and make it usable for people.
It's executing on its plan. And so the benefits of doing this in linear, right? Number one is you can hook it up to your entire old backlog of things. Number two is you can kind of have that audit trail in your normal task management system. What else?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is the collaborative aspect, right? Like a lot of people are using, AI supported coding tools. And typically the the interaction model is very intense, right? Like if you think about something like Cursor or something like that, or even Cloud Code, looks like it ran into an error, so it's going to retry. But like, if you look at those kinds of tools, there's a high amount of feedback back and forth, right, and some interaction. But then no one else is privy to it. Like no one knows what's going on. No one knows you even use these tools to accomplish this. If someone else sees something weird happening, like they can't really interject because they just don't have the opportunity to. So a lot of doing this inside of your issue tracker makes it so that you can have different people contribute different aspects, right? The issues that you deal with are not necessarily ones that you came up with, right? A lot of times, if you think about how a company works, there's like some kind of intake and triage process, right? Maybe your customer support people like have some way to escalate tickets and into like as bug reports and things like that. And it kind of like gels really well with your ecosystem, right? Without you having to, copy paste a bunch of stuff back and forth, or even using things like MCP is like, it's like slightly tedious to do that. Because you end up having to like, have this mental model of like where all these things are stored. So doing it directly really has that benefit.
All right. And then it just links us over to the right place within CodeGen. Why wouldn't you just do this in CodeGen?
You could. The question is like, well, if you're in the business of coming here, finding your issue, kind of copying the description, moving it into CodeGen, telling it to do it, you're kind of back in that single player mode. And all of this stuff is kind of happening outside the view of your colleagues. So, so you can definitely do it that way, right? And you can accomplish this. But, if I'm, if I'm an engineer and then my manager comes and they want to see what's going on, like they can click through on the same link. Like all of this stuff is kind of happening in public. So, what we're really trying to do is adding this like collaborative layer into this this sort of AI supported coding process.
And I think that's the really important point here is you're getting all of the right issues that have been prioritized, but maybe haven't been resourced. You're putting a transparent process around it so that people can evaluate it. So many videos you're going to find on YouTube, they're just focused on CodeGen or just focused on Devin. I think this workflow is really important for people who are working inside of companies.
Yeah. And importantly, it offers an interesting jumping off point for like the next step, right? Because so now like CodeGen's finished its work, which is great, right? And it attached the PR into this issue, which is up here now. There are a lot of things that you can do here. Like we have a sort of QA process, right? Where like our designers and PMs kind of come here and they look at this stuff. But you can imagine that this gets picked up by other agents as well, right? There are plenty of ways to do automatic regression testing and those kinds of things. And by having an orchestration layer like this, there's a very clear, there's a clearinghouse for all this data so that it can get picked up by the next agent. Otherwise, you're maybe dealing with either manually setting up data pipelines or all these little point-to-point integrations, which doesn't really help anybody, right? It's like a lot easier to have some kind of like message bus, like Linear provides.
100%. So can we see how CodeGen did?
Yeah. So I'm going to click through on the PR here, and it kind of gave its plan, right? And again, for any reviewer looking at this, like text is the universal interface. Like no engineer is going to write a detailed plan like this. So it's, for these kinds of things, it's actually a pretty good improvement over, the status quo. And it made some changes, right? It changed a couple of files. It looks like, it's manipulating local store. It's, added some JavaScript here to sort of toggle some stuff. And it changed some of the CSS to, move the stuff into classes. The real test, which, is the sort of check out the branch and kind of see what's going on. So let's do that. Sorry, let me get back into here.
It doesn't seem like it's been vomiting out like way too much code. I think that's the important thing to look at in this step is sometimes AI is just kind of like this LLM has just written so much for this PR. They over describe or over explain. So I think that's kind of the important part here is what you're looking for.
Yeah. So I'm going to pull down all of the remote branches and check out this branch that it just made. I'm just going to restart my server just in case. All right, cool. So I restarted the server, and now let's go to what it looks like. All right, so it went to light mode. It looks like it added this button into the corner. And now I can sort of toggle between light and dark mode like I would expect, right? Like this is, something that, again, this kind of feature it's a very small feature, right? It was a very sort of contained set of changes, but most of people's repositories are just fully inundated with this kind of stuff, right? This is there's just an entire sort of like subclass of issues that people have in their backlog that will never ever get touched, and I think that when it comes to things like product quality and just making sure that all the rough edges are sharpened out, something like this can like really help, like immediately, like on day one, right? You don't have to do that much setup to make it happen.
Today's episode is brought to you by the AI PM certification on Maven. Run by Mikdad Jaffer, who is a product leader at OpenAI, this is not your typical course. It's 8 weeks of live, cohort-based learning with the leader at one of the top companies in tech. OpenAI just doesn't stop shipping, and this is your chance to learn how. Run along with product faculty and Mo Ali, the course has a 4.9 rating with 133 reviews. Former students come from companies like OpenAI, Shopify, Stripe, Google, and Meta. The best part? Your company can probably cover the cost. So if you want to get $500 off, use my code AAKASH25 and head to maven.com/product-faculty. That's maven.com/product-faculty. Today's episode is brought to you by Maven. The problem with most courses online, like Udemy, is there's no live component, and the instructors aren't experts in their fields, they're professors. At Maven, you get direct live access to experts and operators from the world's best tech companies. You can't get that access anywhere else, in any university, and you usually can't find them on YouTube either. I've featured so many of Maven's experts in the newsletter and podcast for that reason. To help you out, I've put together a collection of courses I recommend at maven.com/x/Aakash. This includes courses like AI prototyping for PMs, product sense for PMs, and getting an AI PM certification. Visit it now at maven.com/x/AAKASH.
I think that's one of the crazy cool things about Linear, and at least as someone who has used both Jira and Linear, I noticed it felt like you guys didn't have a huge internal queue of these thousands of bug issues. You guys seem to be processing through those and accurately prioritizing them. And if people want to replicate your craftsmanship, I feel like this workflow will really help them get to that level of craft.
Yeah, and in all honesty, like even us, like we have to do some pretty severe triaging internally as well, right? Like we definitely try to fix as many bugs as we see. We're very focused on that level of craftsmanship, like you said. But there are some low level things where even we don't get to it, right? And it's and like some of our users do. It's not the most obvious stuff, but for those things, we've used this kind of workflow like pretty consistently, and it's really helped.
And how do you properly empower or guide engineers around use of tools like this and make sure that you're not slipping in something that could be really bad? Obviously, everybody just heard about a month ago, Google Cloud Platform had a huge outage. Like you always worry about, we could introduce an outage. I don't even think that outage was introduced by AI, but you're worried with AI even more about that. How do you put in the right processes in place to make sure that doesn't happen?
I think where engineers pay attention, it's going to really shift from I have to spend a lot of mental cycles kind of creating the solutions in the first place to more like a verification and validation mode. I think part of the reason why I wanted to see the plan first was to sort of like understand the basic approach, right? Because if honestly, if someone dumps like a giant pile of code in front of you and you don't know how it's supposed to work and you don't have any semblance of that, it's very hard to even kind of like get into it. So you want to do that two-step process about like understanding the approach, making sure you agree with it. And then once you're doing the code review, you know how things are designed to be structured. And then you have a very good kind of entry point into it.
So it sounds like if you're like an engineering manager or somebody like that, you would want to encourage the engineers to use AI on really easy front-end changes like this, but then ask them to be super careful and really own the code review part of this, and maybe even go back and forth with the CodeGen if needed, or edit the code if needed on their own to make it truly robust.
Yeah. I think that's I think fundamentally that's true. I think one of the things that we're running into, right, is because of this type of technology is so new and these work patterns are so new, that a lot of new, sort of UX and sort of almost even social concerns are emergent. One of them is this, right? If an agent does something and you don't like the result, who's on the hook for it? It's not the robot, right? Like the robot the robot doesn't really care. It doesn't have feelings, right? It's whoever was the one that commanded the robot to do things and accepted the changes and all of that stuff. That's the person that's ultimately responsible in the organization for the consequences of those changes. So I think that there's, everything from the UI that you use to express, who issued the command, all the way up to the more social aspects of like, how do you like think about responsibility in an organization has to change, right, with the advent of this kind of ability.
So we've been talking about it in the context of quality of life fixes, bug fixes, front end simple UI changes. What is kind of the upper limit of this technology today? What would be like the biggest type of impactful feature you'd give it?
I think it can contribute in different ways to different types of features, right? Like the bigger the scope of the feature, the more, kind of chance it has to, the more surface area you have to just like review, right? In the first place. But it can do all sorts of interesting things. You can, for example, it can formulate a plan and you can like work with it a lot on the plan level and ask it to scaffold something for you, and then you can kind of take it over yourself, right? That's like one way of collaborating with the agent. Another way is to sort of, just tell it to implement it in a few different ways, right? I think something that, again, it's emergent that you would never tell a person to do this. You wouldn't be like, hey, engineer, give me 3 competing implementations of the same feature, and I'm going to choose the one I like the most. Like you would just never do that. It's just, I don't know. It's rude. It's a weird thing to do. It's like you think of it as like a waste of resources, but you're paying, maybe a couple of dollars to get an agent to kind of give you those variations. And in that scenario, it's like, you're okay, right? Because you can run these things in parallel. It's like time is your ultimate resource, and it's not taking extra time. You just, kind of copy the issue 3 times and kind of give it slightly different instructions for each of them. So there's a lot of different ways to utilize, like coding agents specifically, right, in all these different contexts that we're only really beginning to kind of see and discover in the wild.
If you had to put on your prediction hat, how far are we from being able to just focus on what is in our linear backlog, making sure that those tickets are really well expressed, and then assigning the whole sprint to CodeGen?
I think, in your, that scenario already exists for people, right? Like, to be very clear, right? What we're seeing in terms of usage of this kind of tool is there's a sort of like extreme difference. Like some companies are only, kind of using it for low-hanging bugs, for, maybe only superficial kinds of things. And other orgs, they're just like, look, every single PR we make, the first pass is through an agent, and then we'll make corrections. And like, 20% of it we have to fully bail out because it's just too complicated or something. But, like the range is already enormous. And part of it is, a choice of how things are constructed in the first place. Some code bases are easier for it to grapple with than others. There's the choice of language, the choice of like architecture, and those kinds of things. And so I think we're really at the beginning of it, but like we already see that, some teams are really living in the future and some teams are kind of just like, dipping their toes in the water.
It feels to me like once these agents really figure out how to handle giant code bases so that they're actually like understanding the whole code base, and once they're creating a little bit more reliable code, and if we look at like in the last year how much more reliable the code has gotten in just like 2 or 3 years, a lot of startups will just be doing this, where they're focused on organizing their linear backlog, making sure that they have the right tasks in the right priority order, and then assigning it to an agent, and maybe having 1 or 2 engineers reviewing and fixing those things where they might have needed 10 or 12 in the past.
Yeah. I mean, that definitely already exists today, right? I think a big function of it is just how familiar and how comfortable the engineers are working like this, right? If your job description changed so dramatically that you're spending the vast majority of your time reviewing code instead of like originating it, it takes a bit of getting used to, but I think we'll get there very quickly. I think it'll be much faster than even like the most optimistic people expect.
So for the startup founders or the engineering leaders watching this, what are the things you're looking for? What is the title of this new role? Is it still software engineer? And then how do you test to make sure that they are going to be able to work in this way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still software engineer. I think something that I've certainly done a lot in the past when I was hiring engineers, that I think will be more important is having the interview process involve reading a lot of code, right? So much of the impact that you're going to have is you read a lot of code, you understand what's going on, you like kind of help integrate it into the rest of the code base, and you're able to kind of like spot kind of problems like fairly quickly. And I think that if you're able to do that, like that's probably going to be a much more core skill set than it's been in the past.
And I think that the other big thing that's going to happen here is that the product management skill set is going to become actually quite important, right? Now the restriction is not on how many tasks you can complete. That's always been our constraint. Like you said, like that's always been the trade-off. Linear, for instance, has made more towards quality than other people had. But in this new world, I think it's more about like, what code are they reviewing? Are you prioritizing the right things? Are you doing things that are going to drive business impact? I think that, like if you asked product managers, like, hey, what do you hope your job is? Right? Like, don't worry about the realities. Like, what in your kind of best fantasy of your job, like what is it? It's like, well, it's about making the right decisions, it's about understanding the customer and like connecting things back to the business and like driving impact. So I think if anything, it'll let PMs have the reality of their job get much closer, right, to the sort of optimistic like hope. If you guys have enjoyed this conversation with Nan so far, you will love our entire conversation, which you can find on Apple or Spotify podcasts, where we break down the linear method. And you will also love my newsletter, where we go even further on tactics, tools, and frameworks that you can take today to adopt this linear way of working.